unless they know what the pipe size is. So that could be something that, if there's no numbers on it, like this one here, you wouldn't know which one it is because this one doesn't have size. The newer one at least has a part number which would denote the size. The older one, you have to actually measure the pipe that it's in.
Okay.
And then on the flip side, to what Bob was saying, there are two 2-inch option valves on the V42 series. You have the V42G is a 2-inch valve, and that has a number tagged on it as a 426. There's also a V42F, which is a 425 2-inch valve, which is a little bit smaller. The actual body of the valve is actually just a little bit smaller than the 426 valve, but they cut it as a 2-inch, and you can only get that in 2-inch. So if a customer calls and says, I have a 2-inch Aquamatic valve, the question I ask is, on either the valve cap or somewhere on the valve body, do you see the numbers 426 or 425 casted on the valve cap or the valve body? So if a customer says, oh, it says 425, then I know that is a 425 Aquamatic valve would be a V42F. Correct. And if it's a 426 valve 2-inch, it would be a V42G. So it can be a little trial and error and a lot of questioning to the customer to try to figure out what they have.
And that's why you also have your guides that you typically either email or fax to a person to give them a little information of what you're looking for.
Correct. As far as determining, these valves can have up to several different options. For example, this particular valve here, we have a normally open valve that's spring assist open. In an application, a normally open valve typically will have some kind of a control pressure line piped into this particular port. Typically on the data sheets they denote this as port C on a cut sheet for a valve. And basically on a normally open valve, what you're doing is you're either using some type of water pressure or air pressure to pressurize a chamber inside here where the diaphragm sits, and it's going to force the valve in the down position. If you have a screwdriver there, Bob. So basically, you're pushing down on this plunger, forcing the valve in the closed position with pressure. And then when you release your pressure, what's going to happen is the valve will open itself up from the inlet pressure going inside. That's typically how the operation has. Now, with this particular valve, there's a spring assistant open we see on the tag. Now, the way you can, know that you have a spring assist open if you didn't have this tag is if you push down on this valve, on a standard normally open valve, and you let go, the valve will stay in the closed position. But this
assuming there's no water.
Assuming there's no water. If you just have this valve sitting in, we know there's a spring assist open option. If I push down on this and then I release it, it opens itself back up again because there's a spring inside that's allowing it to open up again. So that's a good way, if you're not sure, is by taking off your fitting here to see if you actually have a spring assist to open on this particular valve.
Because if you were trying to replace it or repair it, knowing that's important, and
knowing this tag's not here as well.
Yeah, if the tag's not there, and then if you try to, you could be surprised because until you open it up, you may not know what's in there unless you do maybe something like that to see what's going on.
Correct. That's actually an easy way as opposed to removing, your bolts off and looking inside to determine if you actually have the spring assist to open, because you wouldn't be able to tell from this particular valve right here. Now, on the flip side, a spring assist closed option, typically the spring sits up above the diaphragm that's inside here, and this piece is actually extended up slightly. So there's kind of a different configuration on the body, so that the spring inside is forcing the valve in the closed state. Granted that there's no inlet pressure coming in there. So that's how you can kind of tell if you do have the spring assist closed. and if you don't have a tag on this valve to tell you that, one way is to look to see if there's like an extended piece on this cap that a spring might be inside there.
And then it would be, you have your control pressure would be on the underside of the diaphragm, okay, which is here.
Oh, okay.
Because
Instead
the
of
spring
the top.
is pushing it closed, so you have to have it underneath in order to open it, because you have to overcome the spring to open the valve.
Right. Bob was mentioning a pressure line on this port here. That's also another way you can know you have a normally closed valve. Is typically a normally closed valve uses pressure to open, obviously, and typically what you might find if you just have a normally closed valve, typically there's a pipe plug that's put in this port, and then you run a control pressure line into this port. And the way that a normally closed valve functions on the insides, there's a shaft that's inside this valve that's hollow, and your water pressure flows in and it'll flow through the hollow shaft, pressurize the chamber that's inside here, and it'll pull the valve in the down state. And then how you open it is to induce pressure underneath to press it back open. So that's kind of the function of a normally closed Aquamatic valve without any spring functions or anything like that. One question I have to customers, and it's on the question guide, is do you have a control pressure line running into either one of these two ports? Which port do you have a pressure line running to?
And I presume I've seen people sending pictures in. Is that helpful?
Yes.
Of the valve itself. Is there limit stops too?
Limit
that
stop
bolt?
is like a bolt that goes on the top that you can adjust. You can limit the opening of the valve. If you have that, then one of these ports will be drilled out. So there's different options, and limit stops are easy to tell because it's an adjustable bolt that's on the top. Some of the ones that aren't is, like you said, it is if the spring assist closed, spring assist open, normally closed. And again, here, if this thing was in line under pressure and they didn't know if it was normally open or not, again, if they took that off and pushed it down, if the line pressure pushed it back up, or if there was no line pressure, like this one here, if you push that stem back down, it's not going to pop up again. It's down. Now it's closed and it doesn't pop up again. The only way it's going to pop up if there's pressure underneath it. So there's no springs in this valve at all. Spring says close or open, doesn't matter.